Good morning. I have a question for you. If you have a choice between a one shot adventure or a campaign, which would you prefer? I'm Jonathan Albin, the Master's Guide, and I've been GMing for 50 years, and that's saying something. But I have to say that the more challenging of the two, in terms of writing for a game master, is the one shot over the campaign. And I'll be explaining to you why. But before that, if you would go ahead and click all the buttons down below, especially give the like button a punch there, and make sure you follow us on Twitch so you can be updated whenever we are doing new episodes, and also subscribe because subscription helps to keep this a daily channel. All right, so the one shot, the single adventure, the 1 week, one and done, as the saying goes, game session. Why is that a harder adventure to write? We'll go into that in just a second. But I wanted to make sure you understood that when I speak of a one shot, I'm speaking literally of that, being able to complete the adventure of the encounter in one session and be wrapped up. That makes it more difficult. Certainly, a lot of people will consider a story to be a one-shot if it's the very first episode, and will determine whether or not there's more of a story to be told there or not as the session goes on. But the very element of having it have a finite beginning, middle, and end all in one episode, that's quite a challenge. And so we're going to talk about not only what a one-shot is, why a one-shot is so difficult, and how to some actual techniques and tips that will help to make this an accomplishable task. So, as we usually do, my opening salvo today is on role play of a one shot, and I have to say that I have yet to find somebody who consistently runs a one shot well, only because almost every case of a one shot generally ends with a dissatisfactory ending, unsatisfactory because there is something still to do, something still to accomplish, something more to learn. And thereby, the one shots that are sequential aren't really one shots. They are actually a campaign mechanism wrapped up in little bows so that each one is done within the time frame. But the element that makes a one shot truly a one shot would be the fact that the story is encompassed by the beginning and the end of the episode. So I'm going to be giving some examples and talking about how that element works. But I just wanted to put it out there that generally speaking, the one shot is sort of the unicorn of role-playing games, because even the major campaigns that are run at conventions and such are not truly one-shot, because generally they are a part of a much larger story, and the ending may actually be serialized for the purpose of running another adventure and another adventure. The example that I can think of immediately are the Giants series, where you got the Hill Giants facility, then you've got the Frost Giants facility, and then you finally have the Fire Giants and Cloud Giants. And this process of one shots aren't really one shots because this whole story is encompassed in the group, and so it more aligns itself with the concept of a series, and that's okay too. That they're different elements. But today's episode is going to be working on how we can make a one shot work and how it can fit that definition in particular. Okay, so this set of rulings, or this set of suggestions, actually fits into campaigns as well. So I want to clarify, this is actually the elements of an encounter. And by definition, an encounter is just what we're talking about. The idea of the one shot is it's going to be one engagement that is sufficient unto itself to tell a story and therefore be standalone. in its structure. Now there are some certain elements that are going to be concurrent in any encounter that you run. So whether this is specifically focused on the one shot, which we're trying to do, but also in the case of a campaign. If you're a campaign game master and you run lots and lots of engagements over a period of several months or whatever, the elements of encounters still apply for each one of them. So feel free to embrace this. Take in, as I often say, this is a case of R&D, not necessarily research and development, but rather robbing and duplicating this mechanism over and over so that your game feels coherent one session or a series. So the first thing we're talk about is what is the objective of the encounter. What is it that the encounter is going to accomplish? Is it going to be the classic defeat the monster and we're done? It's like, yay, we've defeated the monster. Is it going to be discover the crime? So, for example, maybe it's a murder mystery kind of an element and you're trying to determine who, what, when, where of the criminal act or behind it. This idea of the objective is important because you have to very clearly define what that encounter is so that you can prevent it from running over time. And this is, if you want to talk about the one challenge in any role-playing environment is to determine how long an encounter will last. Now, the classic role-play games such as Dungeons and Dragons build this in by giving you a scale of hit points, and you can therefore gauge how many rounds of theoretical combat are going to take to defeat that monster. And so, ironically, to their credit, the hit point mechanism suits that fairly well, but it's still definitely difficult to gauge unless the game master is intimately aware of who the characters are, the persona are that are in the game. But the idea, therefore, is to grab the idea of what the objective of the encounter is and know when that objective has been met. This is the only way really to gauge how long the encounter will last, is to determine what it was you're trying to do and did you get that done. So, for example, let's say we're setting up a situation where we are going to investigate a series of robberies in the local area and we're trying to catch the thief, so to speak. Well, we have to clearly define what that means. We're going to catch a thief in an area. Okay, well, that's fine. So therefore, now we have to determine who our agents provocateur are in that scene. And while it seems on the forefront in that case of a robbery, it's obvious, the thief himself. But perhaps that's not who the agents provocateur are. This term, agents provocateur, of course, is referring to those people that are going to push the buttons of the players to get them to act in certain ways and drive the story in a certain direction. And before all of my anti-railroaders jump up and point fingers, realize that I didn't say that this provocateur is driving the story to a certain conclusion. It's only driving it towards the conclusion. So perhaps it's the local authorities who really want to catch the guy. Maybe it's his allies who already know who the villain is and are trying to protect him. Then maybe it's the previous authorities who are failing to accomplish this task and therefore are now intentionally mucking about to try to prevent the party from accomplishing it. All of these are agents provocateur, and these are therefore the elements that you have to have a really clear handle on for the adventure to actually play out in the set amount of time. That means we also need to figure out what material evidence, what physical things the players will need to accomplish this. And so while I talk about it as being evidence or clues in the case of this robbery example, it might also be special weapons. It might be the location in particular could be an element of the engagement. So, for example, in the case of the hill giant encounter, that actually is not set up to be a single shot. You're not going to be able to finish all of the encounters and engagements that are built into that in a single encounter, and therefore it's much more of a series or even a saga. But the elements of the particular encounter are those physical evidence pieces, those things that the players can interact with in the scene to accomplish their task. I also talk here about, I want to mention the red herrings as an element of an encounter. And I can tell you that when you're running a single shot adventure, you want to make the red herrings 0. You want to, if you have them in your mind, realize that they themselves are going to be the things that will cost you the ability of doing this episode in a single session. Any red herrings, any possible direction that could take the players off of the agenda of completing that task will, by very nature, take them into the realm of not completing the task. So it's highly recommended that you keep your red herrings to a limit. Now, those of you that are game masters and are familiar with what a red herring is, perhaps you're going to be more sophisticated and can occasionally put 1 or 2 in. But generally, a red herring is any misdirect, any fancy item or justification that leads the players away from the solution that you had in mind when you put together the adventure. Now, that doesn't mean that every encounter is concluded as you expected. As a matter of fact, that's never really going to happen. As the saying goes, all good plans are thrown out the window once they are put once you're put in the face of the enemy. So, and I'm not saying the players are your enemies, but you're just not going to be able to hold it together if you've put red herrings intentionally in. So make sure you keep those to a minimum. And then finally, some conclusive element. That is the capture of the villain, the demise of the monster, if that is the course, the discovery of the item, whatever the objective of the encounter. You also have to have an idea of when that's going to be concluded. And this may be the hardest part. And so many times I'll recommend that you write a one-shot in the reverse order. So you write the conclusion, you figure out what you're going to have as the impetus for them reaching that location, and then work backwards in developing the story. That way you can see really how long it's going to take. Now, as a game master with all the time that I've had behind the screen, I can tell you that the hardest thing in a game session is to calculate how much time any given element will take. And so the best thing is to build out a ballpark for what that should be. And therefore, as the encounter is going on, you can mentally keep track of it. Generally, in a one-shot, you'll want to utilize a mechanism that makes combat less timely over one that might be more timely. So, for example, if you are going for an encounter with a dragon or other big monstrous beastie, then you need to have the players already powered up to the point where they are going to be able to dispatch it relatively swiftly. Any given combat in a traditional role-play game system generally takes far longer than it should mechanically. An engagement with a villain's sidekicks should be relatively short and to the sweet and to the point, but that's not how those mechanisms tend to fall out. Instead, they tend to really bring the length of the encounter to greater heights than you might want. So realize, therefore, the objective of the encounter will determine how many sub-encounters you're going to have, how many different scenes you're going to have. Also, if you're going to have more than one agent provocateur, that also is going to build the time. So it's a matter of really honing in on how long you expect this one shot to take. If you have had any fight engagements with your players, you have a gauge on how long they take to go through a fight scene. So maybe the encounter is merely the fight scene. So you literally start them at the beginning of combat, and therefore the entire session is played as a combat scene, with the conclusion being the defeat of the monster. That's a perfectly valid one-shot, but it's really the only way to make it a one-shot. If you add any elements beyond that, you are asking for the story to expand beyond its boundaries. And I think this has been the biggest challenge for storytellers throughout my game time period as a player and game master. The idea of being able to hold your adventures to a 3-hour block, or even on the idea of an extended, say, 6-hour block. It's very difficult to get them finished in that time frame unless you utilize this mechanism. Find out what the objective is, limit it to that objective, define who your agent provocateurs are, provide how much time you're going to provide them, provide physical, clear evidence when the party has accomplished the mission, and therefore provide the conclusive elements and thereby end the story. That's the short version of how to build. So let's move on to the next section. Okay, so now that we've got a broad spectrum of things to talk about, let's talk about the real challenge of a one-shot. The real challenge of a one-shot is to make a compelling story that the players will follow, will appreciate, and becomes memorable for them, so that it's something that comes up in recurrent conversations after the game. So that means come up with a compelling monster, a interesting way that the players have come to engage with it, the actual fight scene, and any kind of innovation that could come out of that, and then finally the conclusion and the payoff, if you will. Generally, the one shot is set up so that if you walk into the game week over week and you can play in it, it will give you the satisfaction of having played a role-play game without the burden of having to commit yourself to multiple weeks of play. And therefore, you have to be careful not to let your single shot encounter become a multi-week series, because that is sort of a bait and switch for the player. They came in with the idea that they're going to be done in one session, and you've already tricked them by including them in this larger story into staying week over week, and that's really not optimal. What we really have to do is figure out how to tell the one-shot story in that amount of time, which in some cases can mean the first objective would be to say, okay, it's going to end at this point in the scene. Even though there is more story to be told, nonetheless, we have accomplished what the mission was. And that includes the denouement, that when they get done with the story, they can walk away. So realize that even if you have the desire for your one shot to actually be a sequence of events, and perhaps you've got a series of these one shots that are linked, make sure that each one ends in a way that the players can sigh that sigh of relief and know that they did what they came here to do. And this is the greatest challenge, I believe, to one-shot adventures, is keeping them to that narrow band. The concept of role-playing games, of course, stems from the large epic fantasies of the past. Lord of the Rings, sort of the Shannara series, etc. There's all these different fantastic worlds that have very expansive frameworks, but the challenge of being a good one-shot game master is the ability to make each session stand alone and be a complete story. Which means that one of the other elements of doing one-shots that's really useful is to vary the story. In other words, if you're really good at monster encounters, it's great to have monster encounters in your one-shots. But if you make every encounter just another combat, players will feel disinterested or whatever. And the same would be true if you're just a riddles and mystery kind of guy. If you make every episode riddles and mysteries and there's no conclusive big bad fights, you've undermined yourself as well, because players simply will get tired of whichever specific style of play you undertake. So the benefit of the one shot is it gives you a chance to test yourself on those different genres and different styles of play in a much smaller bite-sized piece, so that you can get your appreciation for that kind of an outcome instead of having to wait around for the time when your inspiration hits you and you add it to your campaign. The next challenge of one shot is that at what level do you set your encounters, and how much of a burden does that put on your players when it comes to playing? Now, in the NycosRPG mechanism, this is not a problem because literally there are no levels, so therefore any persona you want to play in the story is legitimately allowed. So therefore you can throw a one-shot that's a mystery right on top of a one-shot that was a monster killing, because there's no need to change out the persona. Whereas if you are writing a one-shot, you have to calculate what level, what attributes, what feats you're going to allow, what races, what classes you're going to limit your adventure to. And all of these are additional pieces of the process of creating the one-shot that perhaps is more readily faced using a more open RPG system. The final thing that I would say about the one-shot is that the one-shots are a great way to introduce new characters, but the players tend to glom onto a character and want that character's story to continue. So even though the players will often say, oh, I just want to play a one-shot, in reality, what they're wanting to do is try out a new persona, and perhaps that they want that persona to persist. So realize that most of your one-shots should be left with at least some open-ended aspect, so that you could write a sequel to it or advance those persona in your other games in some fashion. So in essence, what this really comes down to is the challenge of a one-shot makes it arguably more difficult to write for than even the campaign, because it is more targeted to the persona and what they are able to bring to the table. All right, so this is the oops. So we've come to the end of the episode I wanted to make for today. I want to thank you for being here. I am recording Mondays through Fridays at 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. So make sure you join us every time you can. Make sure you like and follow, and therefore be able to be aware of when the new episodes are coming by subscribing. And as a bonus, remember, if you're subscribing to the Twitch channel, your benefit of subscription is that you no longer have to worry about commercials on the channel. So make sure you do those things. And what has been your experience with one-shot adventures? Have you run into situations that you'd like to discuss? Feel free to leave any comments. We'd be glad to respond to them, either in another live stream project or, of course, in our YouTube comment sections. So thank you again for being here. I hope to see you in the next episode. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG. Talk to you soon.